Welcome everybody to the Michigan Historic Preservation Network October webinar. My name is Xiaohan Bao Smith. I am your moderator. Today we'll be hearing about the deconstructing the past from farmstead to nature preserve. Before I turn over to our speakers, I would like to go over some Zoom items. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box as you think of them. All the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, please also put them into the Q&A box. The chat box will be used to share links or resources discussed during the webinar. And please participate in the survey after the webinar concludes. If this is your first time attending our webinar, we are the Michigan Historic Preservation Network. We support the sustainability and economic viability of Michigan's historic places through advocacy, education, and direct action. We could not do the work we do without our members and volunteers. So if you are not a member yet, please consider joining us at www.mhpn.org. Our webinar series is sponsored in part by an award from the Michigan Arts and Culture Council. And it's my great pleasure to introduce you our speakers today. We will be hearing from Sybil Colon. She is retired environmental quality analyst from the state of Michigan. We will also be hearing from Krista Jesland. She's the development director from the Lexi Land Conservancy. And last but not least, we will be also hearing from Marian Feinberg. She's a Master of Science in Historic Preservation candidate from the Eastern Michigan University. And with that, I am going to turn it over to our speakers. And please go ahead and share your screen.
Thank you. I believe I'll be able to see the slide when it comes up. Okay. Welcome to Deconstructing the Past, from Farmstead to Nature Preserve. I'm Sybil Colon, and I'm the one who came up with that title. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and thanks especially to the Michigan Historic Preservation Network for inviting us to share this story. There are many others to thank, which we will cover at the end. This is a true story of how a vacant farmhouse slowed down, but also enhanced the creation of a nature preserve. With the help of many partners, we turned the loss of a farmhouse into an opportunity. We put on workshops, we recovered historic materials, we told the stories of two families who made this house their home and how they fit into the landscape and culture of the Iron Creek community. We will cover only parts of that. You can learn more through the webpage we have created. I will share that link later. Not every building can be saved. The house had been built in about 1860. This picture is from about 1900. It went through 3 periods of neglect as its residents' lives evolved along with it. The extra effort it took to perform a methodical deconstruction of the house instead of demolition and landfilling paid many dividends. After I tell my part of the story, Marian Feinberg will discuss more specifics about the deconstruction and the history we uncovered. Then Krista Jesslin will talk about the role Legacy Land Conservancy played in melding land preservation with historic preservation. The star in the center of this map is the Iron Creek Preserve. It is at the eastern edge of the Irish Hills in the far southwest corner of Washtenaw County. The closest town is Manchester at 7 miles. Clinton and Brooklyn are slightly farther, Brooklyn to the west and Clinton to the southeast. The cities of Ann Arbor, Adrian, and Jackson are 20 to 30 miles distant. Adrian is to the south off this map. It remains a relatively isolated area, still out in the boondocks. My grandparents had retired out here in 1948, and I had grown up in Detroit, visiting the farm most Sundays in the summer and on other occasions. That's me in 1961 at 8 years old. I moved into the farmhouse with my husband, Mon, on April 1st, 1976, when we were out of jobs, and did so with the help of my family. Our family group leased with the option to buy the 84 acres from my two aunts. It had been mostly vacant since my grandfather died in 1967. It needed a new roof and an upgrade to the bathroom at a minimum, but we were grateful for its shelter. Within a few years, we had covered over the old Insulbrick siding with vinyl siding and made other improvements. Next slide, there we go. A few years later, Mon and I moved away to take other jobs, and other family members moved in. We started building our house just up the road in 1982 and have lived there since 1983. Over the years, Mon and I consolidated ownership of the entire 84 acres, so I've known this place my whole life. My connection to this land is deep. Next slide. Yes. The farmhouse continued providing shelter until 2010, when the well and septic system failed. Then it sat vacant. There was talk on and off of fixing it up. No one in the family ever pursued the idea seriously or had the money or ability to fix it up. There was no consideration of selling the farmhouse parcel. Whoever was going to live in this house had to be involved in the entire property. It provides the best access to the rest of the property and had been in our family for 76 years. For the first 20 years or so, we mostly let nature take its course. We cut firewood and maintained trails. In about 2000, after realizing that nature needed help against the invasive species, we started doing some land stewardship, including pulling garlic mustard, cutting and poisoning autumn olive and other invasive shrubs, and doing prescribed burns. We were able to get some funding through NRCS programs and other grants, but had never been able to keep up. 10 years ago, when Mon and I were planning our living trust, we decided that most of our property would become a nature preserve upon our deaths. Legacy Land Conservancy agreed they would accept it. 4 years ago, after I had been retired for 4 years, the idea that I could have a nonprofit that owned the property as a nature preserve came briefly into my head. It was a dream, instantly inspiring, but unattainable without lots of resources that we didn't have. I understand that even better now. Suddenly, the thought of waiting until we were dead to start a nature preserve seemed crazy. Why wait? Legacy Land Conservancy was willing to accept the property on this accelerated schedule. This is the Iron Creek Preserve, set to open next spring. 80 acres showing the existing trail system. There is a sturdy bridge across the creek that leads to the main trail. Our house is on the 4-acre parcel cut out of the upper left-hand corner. To the left, at Noggles Road, you can see the outline of Iron Creek that surrounds the farmyard. The rest of the road frontage is bordered by Iron Creek and its associated wetlands. The Iron Creek is an integral part of the preserve. It was certainly integral to the farmyard for all residents, which we should keep in mind as we consider the history of this place. Legacy obtained a grant to help fund the acquisition process, including demolition and landfilling of the farmhouse. Demolition was hard to swallow. Legacy gave me time to explore other options. That's when my research on the history of the farmhouse went into overdrive. This is the only picture I had at the time of the house as it looked after it was built in about 1860. The caption says, "The Grant Sutton's family buggy was drawn by a pair of all-purpose horses." And that was taken in about 1902. I had learned of the Sutton family's presence here shortly after we moved in. Back then, I researched their ownership, interviewed one of the descendants, and met Laura Sutton, the great-great-granddaughter of the builder. I approached the Manchester Area Historical Society about the possibility of restoring the farmhouse into a museum. That was beyond their capacity. No other interested parties could be persuaded to seriously consider the museum idea. I did connect with a graduate of Eastern Michigan University's Historic Preservation Program, Katie Delahoyd, who informed me about deconstruction. She also introduced me to Marion Feinberg, who made the deconstruction part of her coursework at EMU. I got excited all over again. We could learn so much about the house as it was deconstructed. Legacy agreed to pay somewhat more for Architectural Salvage Warehouse of Detroit to perform the deconstruction. Before I get to the original European settlers, I would be remiss if I did not remind you of the indigenous peoples who lived here for 10,000 years before European settlement, after the glaciers had receded. This is a map showing the native ecosystems of this area when it was surveyed by the U.S. Land Office out of Monroe in 1824. The surveyors recorded the types of trees and the land features, including lakes, streams, and hills, which were used to create these maps of the entire state. The Iron Creek Preserve, outlined in red at the center, was oak hickory forest, wetlands, or mixed oak barrens. By the time this remote area was settled in the 1840s and 1850s, the native population had been decimated, as were most of the wolves, coyotes, bears, and cougars that had previously inhabited this area. The indigenous people had a completely different relationship with the land. I think we are all still coming to terms with all of that, so it is important to acknowledge their history, which is substantial, as we explore more recent history. I will now provide a bit of history on the people who lived in this house for 150 years to give you some context for what we found. This picture of the farmhouse is circa 1900. The story of the couple who built this house, starting as early as 1858, has missing pieces that make it interesting to speculate about what we don't know. Richard Sutton was born in England in 1812 and immigrated to the U.S. in 1831. Richard and his fifth wife, Anne Matthews, were first connected to this land on December 23rd, 1857. That's when Anne's brother, George Matthews, deeded several acres of the land he inherited from his father to her, Anne Sutton, not to Richard. Richard was 45, Anne was 20. We surmise that her brother was wary of Richard, who had just returned from a 3-year adventure to California, where he did not reap the anticipated rewards during the gold rush. Their first child, Mary Kay, was born about 4 months later. No one has found their marriage certificate. Mary Kay joined her 10-year-old brother, half-brother, Edward, Richard's son from his second marriage. Richard's 2 older daughters were living in Leone Township, about 20 miles northwest in Jackson County, where Richard had returned from the gold rush in 1856. We do not know how Richard met Anne. It is unlikely they could have built even a part of this house in the 4 months Anne owned the property before Mary Kay was born. We don't know if they lived next door with her brother while they built the house, or maybe they lived in a more temporary abode during the house building process. So circa 1860 is our best guess as to when the house was built. This is part of an 1874 Michigan Township plat map. The Richard Sutton farm is in the center, showing the family now owned about 60 acres and giving the first indication that the family had managed to survive and expand its farming efforts. 3 orchards are shown. 1874 was the year their 7th child was born. 1 child died in infancy. Grant Sutton, whose buggy we saw earlier, born in 1868, inherited the farm when his father died in 1884. His 2 brothers had already established their own farms and families. Anne Sutton, his mother, continued to live with Grant and her 2 younger children. This picture was taken in 1884, the year Richard died. Anne Matthews Sutton is in the center, surrounded by her children, except Mary Kay. Grant is standing to the right of his mother. And this is the wedding picture of Grant and Jenny Bowens in 1889. They continued living on the farm. They had 4 children. The oldest died in infancy and the youngest in childbirth when she was 20. Grant died in 1937, and Ginny moved to Manchester. The house may have remained vacant for the next 11 years, and it was near the end of the Great Depression, and southern Michigan was suffering from severe drought at the time. The first effort to sell the farm fell through when the buyer defaulted on the land contract. Jenny deeded the property to her 2 surviving children. The farm was sold to a new owner in 1947. Then it was sold to my grandparents, Louis and Rose Kolengowski, in 1948. This is the Kolengowski family in the early 1950s. Louis and Rose immigrated to the U.S. from Poland in 1906 and 1908, when each was 16. They met and married in Detroit in 1913, the same year Louis started his electrical contracting business. They had 7 children. These are some of the sheds in the farmyard when my grandparents moved in. We have no pictures of the house from that time. My Aunt Rosemary described the place as very run down when they took over in 1948. My grandfather had left his business to one of his sons to retire and start his own farm. Here is a picture of the 1948 remodeling, that's on the right, and what the farmhouse looked like after 2 layers of siding were removed during deconstruction in 2023 on the left. In addition to gutting the inside of the farmhouse, installing electricity and plumbing for the first time, remodeling, adding on a front and back porch and a bathroom, installing insulbrick siding, and getting a telephone line installed from US 12, they also began growing corn and raising chickens, ducks, and geese. Over the next 20 years, their 26 grandchildren formed bonds with this land and each other as we helped with chores and roamed the hills and fields. We learned to swim in the spring-fed pond across the road that was part of the farm then. The shed in the background had also been refurbished with the same insulbrick siding as the house. Louis Kolengowski died in December 1967. Rose moved to Detroit to live with her daughter. Once more, a death led to the house being mostly vacant for the next 9 years. Once again, family connections led to a new generation taking over, my husband and I, as I've already covered. This project has taken on a life of its own. We have plans to do more research and outreach. We hope to inspire others to consider deconstruction as a way to recover the history and some of the materials that would otherwise be lost during demolition. Please visit our website if you are interested in learning more, or contact me directly. We'll put that website in the chat. Now Marion Feinberg will discuss the deconstruction of the farmhouse that took place in 2023 and some of what we found. Thank you.
Hi there, thanks, Sybil. I'm pleased to be here with you today. I was initially struck by Sybil's enthusiasm, commitment, and eagerness to utilize this opportunity as a catalyst for learning, bringing together community members and various disciplines and perspectives in order to shepherd this project along while doing due diligence and making environmentally friendly choices along the way. I've always been a sucker for cutting edge concepts, multifaceted projects, and of course, a good challenge. I subsequently reached out to Eastern Michigan University's department head and professor, Nancy Burke, to ask how I might be able to incorporate this unfolding project into my studies. Over coffee, we brainstormed a rough sketch of deliverables, and ultimately I earned 2 credits for my efforts. Next slide. Thanks. Writing summarizations and mission statements as well as conclusions, are a necessary evil for anyone familiar with the EMU curriculum. Therefore, I organically came up with the following synopsis, which has helped me both understand and convey my project goals. The Sutton Kulongowski Farmhouse project began with a lofty dream, enthusiasm, creative problem solving, a Manchester Area Historical Society partnership, and a determined grassroots effort to mobilize regional resources to bring the dream of what would become the Iron Creek Preserve to fruition. Next slide. As corny as it sounds, I treasure opportunities to collaborate. I believe in this life we can be both a student and a teacher. This project was the perfect opportunity to tell a valuable and interesting regional story while allowing much of the unfolding of the narrative and research to dictate the who, what, when. The where was pre-established and would not change, but little did I realize how much I would learn about the farmstead's history and the occupants. Note the Sutton Kulongowski farmstead story is in the center of this diagram and the ripple effect that it has created. Look carefully, you might just see your name and or your organization represented. It's imperative to acknowledge the built and natural environment intersection. It is a recurring theme throughout this webinar, yet at times it's easy to overlook such a seemingly obvious umbrella concept. It's critical to record all aspects of a site and to consider the interplay and intersection between the land, so the topography, game trails, ecosystems, plant and animal life, and the material culture, to draw upon an archaeology concept. The material culture, so structures, infrastructure, modifications like the dredging and rerouting of the creek, objects and artifacts. And of course, there are the subsurface deposits, features, artifacts that I must at least mention since I worked as a contract archaeologist for over 10 years, but we don't have time for all of that. All right. For our purpose as historic preservationists, asking questions such as where is the site situated, how are the structures constructed, what structures are visible in historic photographs or absent in historic documents, which are no longer standing, does my site show up on Sanborn maps? And of course, figuring out what regional or locally sourced materials were utilized in constructing our upright and wing farmhouse. These are all important things to consider. As well, we can tell in what phases the house was built, expanded upon with additions, or modified based on materials used. The answer is yes, we can learn about all of these things. One one seven oh 11703 Noggles Road has only had a handful of owners during the last 160 plus years. Other options were considered prior to selecting the deconstruction choice, but none were realistic or feasible due to a few game-changing factors. The house had experienced several episodes of neglect. While remaining vacant, animal infestation and water damage occurred. Due to a leak in the roof, mold became an issue. The septic and water well had failed, and an astronomical budget for property restoration and or other adaptive use options was simply not feasible. Moreover, due to the available road frontage, the house was situated directly upon a prime parking lot space, which would be needed if the acreage were to be optimally utilized and enjoyed by nature preserve visitors. In turn, once I became involved with the project, I began to document both site structures via photography, sketches, floor plan notes, conducted research, maintained a project binder, as well as creating a comprehensive list of artifacts situated within the workshop and those extracted from the house. Okay, we'll stay on this slide so we can catch up. As we remove the plaster and wallpaper on the interior of the house, we came across a charred portion of the back downstairs bedroom, which abutted the hallway and closet. The reason this is so cool is that we found a newspaper clipping from February 13th, 1879, which talked about a fire which originated in the back part of the dwelling house of Richard Sutton on Thursday noon, February 6th, and was safely put out by a Mr. Samuel and Cliff and schoolboys. The clipping stated that Mr. Sutton had been absent from the house at the time. To find evidence of charred lath in the same place described in the newspaper clipping was, to say the least, exhilarating, at least for those of us working on the project. It felt a bit like being a forensic detective, and the more we learned about the house and those who lived there, the more we wanted to know. That being said, and the takeaway, primary sources not only anchor our research, but oftentimes breathe life into seemingly dreary facts. Okay. Next slide. Okay. I think it's important to address the metaphorical elephant in the middle of the room by briefly discussing how methodical deconstruction fits into historic preservation as we currently understand it. In school, we learned about the 4 interventions: preservation, rehabilitation or adaptive use, restoration, and reconstruction. In a perfect world and in theory, I would ideally like to apply one of those previously mentioned to address my historic preservation quandary. But oftentimes one of the 4 is not an option and I must resort to other choices based on an array of scenarios. Therefore, what might a wise choice be? I propose that a 5th intervention, or at least a last case scenario, may not only be considered, but the methods taught in our coursework. Methodical deconstruction can be a viable alternative to total demolition, as long as it's paired with at least 2 or more of the following. And we can say that potentially documentation should happen, as well as maybe some oral histories collected. Although the concept seems counter to the very fabric of what makes historic preservation so near and dear to my heart, destigmatizing methodical deconstruction efforts by pairing them with some of the checklist items can both honor the property as well as provide valuable information, which will soon be lost forever. Okay. Architectural Salvage Warehouse of Detroit won the bid to complete the deconstruction work by default. Another salvage company was not located. In a healthy market, multiple bids create competition and hopefully a reasonable cost for clients. The deconstruction work was extremely taxing on the body and dangerous. I thought I knew what hard work was, and I do. But I have a newfound respect for house builders and anyone in the construction industry or preservation trades world. I want to give a shout out, and I know they're not here, but I want to give a shout out to Crew Chief Mike and the crew members that I worked with, Janelle and Ishmael. The first day of the project, we had a safety meeting to discuss and mitigate potential dangers and to revisit the use of protective gear and site-specific hazards. We discussed areas of contamination and how to approach or not approach removing and or handling materials, which included those with either paint, lead paint, or asbestos. Let's talk a bit about construction materials. Builders readily used available fieldstone to construct the basement or cellar. A limestone-based mortar was likely used mixed with locally existing sand from the creek. Iron Creek runs through the property, and there is a gravel pit a short distance from the house. Therefore, these resources were readily available. Timber was used for the farmhouse beams, plank floors, roof walls, and framing. Scraps of lumber, an array of lumber types and cuts, were used both inside and outside of the structure, creating a patchwork quilt effect. This patchwork effect was especially visible once the 2 outer layers of asphalt shingle and vinyl siding were removed from the rear of the house. Some of the cellar beams still had the exterior bark on them, and one can surmise that either the builder was in a hurry because maybe they needed shelter, maybe winter was coming, or they simply didn't care about the aesthetics. Colossal, well-preserved beams were likely felled locally or at least regionally and displayed hand tool marks. We used a truck and rope to dislodge some of the beams. Some creative problem solving there. Timber framing and wood pegs were also visible. An array of square-cut nails were utilized along with a variety of more modern nails, screws, and metal fasteners. Once the faded and weather-worn vinyl siding, the outermost layer, was removed, asphalt brick was visible, which was a common affordable way to give a structure a facelift in the 1950s. Below the asphalt layers, clapboard was revealed. Some of it was in quite good condition. Hammers, mallets, and several different types of crowbar were used. Somehow the crew acquired a massive tool utilized by firefighters, and they called it Big Daddy. And it was used at specific intervals when no other tool was up to the task. A crew of at least 3 worked from dusk till dawn for over a month. I helped as much as I was able. Janelle and I often worked side by side as a team, especially when removing and transporting heavy, wide, old-growth timber boards, such as the ones featured with my steel-toe hiking boot next to it for scale. Oh, this is not the slide. Okay. 3 large metal dumpsters were filled and hauled off to a landfill. One of the 3 was lined with a bladder in which asbestos-laden materials would be placed. Asbestos and lead paint tests were conducted by a local environmental laboratory, and results concluded that asbestos was found in house windows and in the tool shed, roof, tar paper. Lead paint was found in all aspects of the house due to it being in paints and other materials prior to 1978. We sorted and grouped the materials into 5 basic piles. Discard, salvage, recycle, donate, and sample materials. The materials that we were not able to use, resale, or reintroduce into the salvage construction market in Detroit were tossed into large dumpsters. Examples of these materials might be the vermiculite or damaged wood and lumber that had mold or water damage on it, plaster and wire mesh, etc. We salvaged materials, and we were able to compile 1 large semi-truck trailer full of these salvage materials and several flatbed trailers. So I would say at least a third of what we took down, we were able to salvage and reuse or recycle. So beams, old growth, wide plank milled lumber, plywood, and even newer lumber. Fixtures and such were kept. Recycled items were also put aside. Some items were donated, like the kitchen cabinets for Habitat for Humanity, and we kept some material types to use as features in our little workshops to show people what we had taken down and examples of the different construction materials. Okay, the next slide. I keenly remember that we began on the inside of the house with the molding around the windows in the front sunroom. We removed light fixtures and anything else that was breakable. I began to tackle some of the beadboard inside the sunroom and began to pull back a panel, and thousands of large black ants began to pour out.
Is Marion still there? It looks like Marion's internet may be disconnected for a second here. Let's see if she could rejoin us. There she is.
Okay, wow. Yeah, technical issues. Okay, where was I? Okay, we were talking about the ants and how it looked like a horror film. Strangely, I didn't run away. I stopped, took out my cell phone and took a video clip. It was like everything was in slow motion. It was strange. After the entire first floor was brought down, the second floor came down. What an incredible yet humbling feat. Before the basement was filled in, Sybil and Mon hosted a bonfire gathering in the cellar. It was a lovely way to honor and pay homage to the house, ancestors, history, memories, and to give thanks for a new phase in life, the nature preserve. You can go ahead and move past that one. Okay, great. As the house and tool shed was deconstructed, we held a number of site tours and educational workshops. Laura Sutton and Sybil shared family history. Ray Berg, the president of the Manchester Area Historical Society, recounted regional history supported by historic maps and covered European settlement patterns. Silas is a local resident and quite knowledgeable about regional history, ecology, natural resource, as well as indigenous history and settlement patterns. Jamie Schmidt, a Manchester area resident and a local real estate agent, was incredibly well informed about lumber milling, and we enjoyed whenever she was able to jump in and talk about some of the materials found. Go ahead. Several interesting items were found within the walls of the house as we began to peel away the layers of the onion, including a narrow leather belt with a simple buckle, which was found hanging vertically on a square-cut nail. Dr. Ted Lugabell connected me with Misty Jackson, who is an archaeologist here in Michigan, and she was especially interested in historic artifacts intentionally placed within walls or over doors and windows prior to the walls being sealed with plaster or boards. She attended one of our workshops and explained that there was a long-standing pagan tradition in the Old World, especially in the British Isles, and of course then brought over by European immigrants, of placing ordinary or seemingly mundane personal items such as a shoe, or in some cases, dead, mummified, preserved animals, such as a cat or a bird, wrapped in fabric in order to ward off curses or provide safety for home occupants. Okay. Many thanks go out to Linda and Peter Knox for graciously filming all workshops and site tours. We were able to upload some of these films to YouTube, and much of our work will be hosted on the Manchester Area Historical Society website, as well as in their expanding archives. My hope is to write a how-to manual which can help guide individuals who may want to follow our footpath rather than having to reinvent the wheel and choosing demolition, methodical deconstruction, rather than the old school ways of demolition. Go ahead. Like most things in life, things exist in a cyclical manner. Life, growth, death, back to the earth, wash, rinse, dry, repeat. I'd like to encourage my fellow classmates, and I can't do this enough, by encouraging them to get involved in a project which is hands-on, dirty, and gritty at times. I became invested in the project, and it has changed me for the better. If you would like to learn more about this project, please consider attending my lecture, which is scheduled for next March at Troy Historic Village. Jen Peters has invited me to speak, and I'm eager to do so. So on to legacy. Sorry about the technical issues. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marian, and thank you, Sybil, for giving that background. The two of them have really spearheaded a lot of this work, so we're really, really grateful for them. Like has been said, my name is Krista. I'm the development director here at Legacy Land Conservancy, and I'm here to give you just a little bit of a taste of who Legacy is and why we're involved in this project, and what the history we're going to be making here is going to be. We've gotten a little bit of the past. I'm here to give you just a little peek of the future. So Legacy Land Conservancy is a 501c3. We were founded in 1971, so we've been around for more than 50 years. And we work to protect land, forests, wetlands, working farms, prairies, riverfronts, all of it. And we work to protect those acres permanently. We work primarily in Washtenaw, Jackson, and Lenawee counties, though we do have a tendency to tiptoe outside of those borders. And our mission is to safeguard land and water to support thriving, diverse, and resilient communities forever. And that's a little picture of our staff. Earlier this year, that's just about all of us, though we have a couple new faces that have joined us over the summer. These are the folks who are working in Southeast Michigan to help protect local land. So we do that with a couple of different tools and with a couple of different focuses. Our three main focuses are working farms, helping protect usually around 200 acres or less of family farms. The average age of a farmer here in Michigan is 63, and every day we lose up to 320 acres of farmland. So we're seeing a lot of farmland loss, especially in Southeast Michigan. So we work hard to help protect that land so that there is a safe and local food base for feeding our communities. We also focus on fresh water. We are in the Great Lakes state, so we would be pretty remiss if we didn't have a focus on water here. In our Tri-County service area, we have four major watersheds: the Huron River watershed in Washtenaw, the River Raisin watershed in Lenawee County and parts of Washtenaw, and the Kalamazoo and Upper Grand in Jackson County. So those four watersheds represent a bit of a split in the middle of the state, a continental divide, and outflow to both Lake Erie and Lake Michigan. So the work that we do here to protect water quality affects not just the watersheds in this Tri-County service area and a little bit beyond, but the health of the entire Great Lakes ecosystem. And then, like you might imagine, places to play. So we work very hard to protect places where people can go out and experience nature. We have 7 public nature preserves, and Iron Creek is going to be our 8th, and we're really so excited to bring Iron Creek on board. We have over 400 acres of publicly accessible recreation space, and more than 9 miles of trails for folks to explore. Typically, they're scattered around Washtenaw County, but we have one in Stockbridge, and 2 in Plymouth that are just right on that Washtenaw border. So these spaces offer a place for people to have respite, to go hiking, to connect with their friends, to connect with the natural world. And of course, we do a lot of work to steward these places and keep invasive species out, keep trails clear, keep parking lots clean, keep the spaces inviting as possible to as many people as possible. We know that not everyone has the privilege to have, spring trilliums blooming in their backyard, but for us, it's really important to offer that experience for every Michigander that we can. And we protect land using 2 tools. The first is our oldest tool, the conservation easement. It is a legally binding agreement that permanently protects a piece of land. It is between a landowner and Legacy, so we are a conservation easement holder in that sense. And what it does at its base is allows us to purchase development rights on a piece of land. So that restricts the kinds of development that can happen. And every conservation easement is a little bit different based on the conservation values of that land. But what the example I like to give is we'll protect a piece of farmland that keeps that farmland farming and also protects the natural communities around it. So the wetland that abuts that farmland stays a wetland. It can't be sold off to a Walmart and then, you know, gas stations popped up or anything like that. It stays as a natural community. And then relevant to our conversation here is our preserves program. So all of our preserves are pieces of property that we own and therefore are protected in perpetuity. And those conservation easements are forever as well. So the work that we do here really is forever. When we say that we are working to steward and defend these properties, we make sure that they can't be sold off to property or to developers who wouldn't protect the conservation values of that piece of property. So this is just a little snapshot of our service area. As you can see, we do tiptoe outside of our Tri-County area. Natural communities don't really respect geopolitical boundaries, so they're a little squishy for us too. And you can see Iron Creek on this map, I'll use my cursor here, is right kind of at the very heart of our service area, which is one of the many reasons we're so excited to be bringing this project on board. Over the last 50 years, we protected 10,000 acres. We have more than 106 conservation easements. And we're really excited to add this to our portfolio of work. So Iron Creek Preserve, you've heard a lot about its history, but why is it so important for us? The 80 acres feature incredibly rare wildlife, including white lady slippers, orchids, and eastern Massasauga rattlesnakes, which is Michigan's only rattlesnake and a very endangered species. It features frontage on Iron Creek, which is an important tributary to the River Raisin. So like I was talking about earlier, water quality is really important to us. So what happens around Iron Creek Preserve and in that creek shed has a really big impact not only on the River Raisin downriver, but Lake Erie eventually. And then it's home to a prairie remnant fen and a dome fen. And these are two really rare and special wetland types. They're only found in the upper Great Lakes regions, and they're very threatened by climate change. So they also are home to some of these really rare flora and fauna, right? Like the white lady orchid slippers and the eastern Massasauga rattlers. So keeping these intact is really, really important to us. We maintained ownership of the property in April of this year. We celebrated Earth Week by bringing on Iron Creek. It was really fun. And since then, we've worked really hard to start getting the property ready for open. So we've had 6 volunteer work days helping to remove invasive autumn olive and garlic mustard, really building on the work that Sybil and Mon had started doing on their own, as well as removing several unsafe cabins that was a little deeper into the woods than the farmhouse, clearing that debris, clearing any of the debris from the farmhouse project that had been left over, beginning engineering planning for a parking lot, as well as repairing a pedestrian footbridge that goes over Iron Creek and is really the entrance into the preserve. And then we've also invited a bunch of groups in to come get a lay of the land, so to speak, and start to document species representation on the preserve. So we've had the Jackson Audubon Society, the Washtenaw Bird and Nature Alliance, the Greater Washtenaw Moth and Butterfly Society. And so far, we're really excited about the sort of stuff we've seen. So what's coming up next for Iron Creek? Are you excited about coming and visiting Iron Creek yet? Because I really hope you are. We're working on installing signage kiosk in both English and Spanish that'll have a full trail map. It will feature hike highlights that highlight the natural communities of the area. And it'll also give a tiny bit of a background on how Iron Creek came to us and some of this history. We're also working on a memorial space to get a little bit deeper into the history of the farmhouse itself so that people can visit the preserves and learn a little bit more, not just about the natural history, but the people history of the place too. I mentioned the parking lot and pedestrian footbridge. That's a bunch of engineering and planning work that we're doing, and hopefully we'll start that construction work over this winter. And then we're developing a 5-year preserve management plan. We do our management plans in 5-year chunks, and this helps us decide kind of a game plan of how to best steward this property. So all of the work that we're having folks come in and do species documentation, that all helps inform what are the special communities in this on this property, how can we best support them, where do we need to put our efforts, what kinds of recreation do we want to see on the land, and how can we best support that as well. And then we're going to celebrate with a grand opening. We're aiming for next spring, which you are all invited to. And I really hope that we see some of the names that are listed here show up for us. And then finally, I'm the development director, so I think I'm legally obligated to mention funding. We're lucky enough that this property itself was donated to us by Sybil and Mon, and we are deeply, deeply grateful. We also received a grant, Sybil mentioned, from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to help with the acquisition costs, like surveys, title works, everything to move it into our name, as well as the farmhouse deconstruction costs and some of the parking lot and kiosk design and initial startup costs. But something that's very important to us as we are caretakers of properties forever and in perpetuity is that we truly fund what we're doing in a forever fashion. So the funds that we need to open, a little more than $450,000, is to fund an endowment for this property. And that would help spin off an amount of money that would help pay for staff time, trail maintenance, materials, volunteer support, educational opportunities, bringing student groups out, community partnerships, all the stuff that really goes along with preserves and preserve stewardship. So we're working hard over the next 6 months or so to get ourselves ready for a grand opening in the spring. So how can you help? Are you super excited? Do you want to get involved yet? If Sybil and Marian didn't convince you, I'm hoping I do. You can, of course, donate. That is maybe the most straightforward way, but there's so much more beyond donating that you can do. Connecting with Legacy to stay involved. We have a monthly e-newsletter that you can sign up for on our website. And we just send it out once a month. We don't overkill, we promise. And it is usually full of good and fun news. So if you need good and fun news in your inbox, we're definitely the place to go. So you can get updates on our progress at Iron Creek, how we're doing, how close we are to opening, when our opening will be. You'll get the invite that way as well. You can also spread the word. Share this presentation, this webinar with folks. It'll be recorded. Or it's being recorded and it'll be posted onto YouTube. So please share this presentation and help get other people inspired. And then of course, volunteering. There will always be volunteer opportunities on Iron Creek. It is a core part of our Preserve Stewardship program. So go online, grab our website and volunteer for a work day. We're done with work days for the fall, but we'll start up in the spring. So the best way to get notified ahead of time really is that e-news, and to sign up, talk to Hannah, our donor outreach coordinator. She heads up our volunteer programming. And then if you want to chat more, these are our email addresses, and I will be sure to pop these in the chat when I'm done. But our inboxes are open. Please ask us questions. There will be a few minutes after this for FAQs as well, or for a Q&A. But please ask us questions. We are open books. And then finally, we really wanted to hold some space to thank the folks that really helped this project come alive. You know, the three of us are here, but it was a whole community effort coming together. And Sybil, Marian, I don't know if you guys want to jump in and say a few things about the folks on this list.
Yeah, go ahead, Sybil.
Unmute. Yeah, well, particularly Ray Berg, the president of the Manchester Area Historical Society, and Chris Rutherford, who is the executive director of the Architectural Salvage Warehouse of Detroit, Laura Sutton was a great asset as well as a good friend. And numerous other people helped with workshops and gathering videos and pictures. And so it's been, yeah, a big thank you to everyone. It's been a great project. Thanks.
Well, I think we're ready for questions, Johan.
Hey. I want to say a big thank you to our speakers. That was a great presentation, and I'm very excited. Hopefully, I can go visit in the spring when it opens. We do have quite a few questions here, so let's just get started. Okay, first question is for Sybil. It appears that the property is pretty isolated, but you're close to some good-sized cities. What development has there been in that region?
Yeah, mostly it's single family homes that seem to be the issue. We do have a land preservation effort going on in Manchester Township. So yes, there is concern about that, but we're still mostly agricultural and natural areas, but getting peppered with houses quite a bit. I can, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so if it's okay, we can move on to the next question. Okay, it's also for Sybil. So it is so smart that you reviewed your philanthropy as something that you wanted to start before your death. Has this been satisfying for you?
Very much so. It's the appreciation and excitement continues to build as we get close to opening, and I'm so happy that we decided to move forward like this, because now I get to be a part of it and to share some of my knowledge of the property.
Great. Next question. Are there any other of the early families still in this area?
There certainly are. This is a community where you're not an old timer unless you have at least 3 or 4 generations here. So there are still a few Sutton family members and others, but yes, and the Historical Society is quite active, and they've been gathering lots of information on people. So
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, so next question. So is the unit of government the township for this
Yep.
property? Okay, have they been receptive to this project?
Yes, I would say so. Manchester Township, I did inform them, early on before this happened. And yeah, so they have been receptive. Absolutely.
Hey, thank you. Next question. What is the estimated cost difference between methodical deconstruction by a company like DSW and standard demolition by a company like a, a demo? Is there a way to combine the two to save some costs?
I maybe can speak in some rough funding numbers. So when we first wrote our grant, we wrote it for a demolition, to be completely transparent. It was through conversations with Sybil that we came to a better conclusion for this project. I believe we had earmarked about $20,000 in that grant for the demolition of the house and the chicken coop. And it came out to be somewhere around $27,000 for the deconstruction project. So it was, a good chunk more. And maybe Sybil and Marion can speak a little bit more to whether or not they think that there could be like a combo project that, protects some, but then does, the demolition of what might need to be. But
Marian, you go ahead.
I don't have a great answer for this, or at least a clear-cut one. I think there probably is room for a bit of a balance, especially if the budget is restricted. I think that, to be completely frank, I think that they initially underbid the job. And they had to start doing things like, the crew stayed nearby for about 2 weeks in Airbnbs, and then they ran out of money. So they had to go back to Detroit and spend the night in Detroit and make that drive every day, which is, logistically, a challenge, as well as, you're spending 45 minutes each way and, driving. So you're not actually working on the project. But there are a number of things that I think I would probably do differently if I were to do this all over again. And that's part of what I learned, is like what worked, what didn't work, and how to make those adjustments in order to make it more feasible and effective and more cost effective farther down the road. So yes, my short answer is yes, but I would need, more time to talk about that in detail. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Next question. What kind of market is there for salvaged architectural materials? For example, how are they used?
Marion, you want to cover that?
The market for salvage architectural materials, I think there's a huge market for it. I mean, the only company that we could really hammer down to give us a bid was out of Detroit. I know there are a few firms around the larger firms that do this around the country, but we couldn't get a second competitive bid. So it's a niche market. I think it's ready for the, we need more people to do this. And I guess part of what I'm hoping that we accomplish here by discussing what we did was to try to get more folks on board and for them to start up companies like the one that came from Detroit to do this. There's a huge market, and yeah.
If I could just jump in for a second, Architectural Warehouse, Architectural Salvage Warehouse of Detroit has a huge warehouse in Detroit, close in downtown, basically, and they're very well organized. I asked them, what are you going to do with these old timbers that held up the foundation? And they said, oh, people make them into mantles, and they build like bases for conference tables and all kinds of creative uses. There are lots of people really interested in these old materials, and there was one in Grass Lake recently that just closed down, but that was an older guy, so I don't know. But yes, I think there is a market, and I'm sure it can be developed even more.
I'll hop in one more time on that one, as well as, what Sybil was talking about, making mantles and this type of stuff. They took the doors and some of the windows and lots of other, fixtures and all of that type of stuff that can basically be put into houses that are being restored in Detroit, or farmhouses in the area that are missing a specific door from, let's just say the Queen Anne period, and we need a specific, type of door. So, I mean, there's a market for this with new construction. There is a market for, it in the renovation world. I mean, there are just so many ways to use these salvaged materials and to keep them out of landfills and in circulation. So.
Great. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next question. After deconstruction of a home like this, what actually remains on the property? So is the land recontoured, or can you still see where the house once was?
You can definitely see where the house was because they filled it in with sand. That was another donation from forget the name of the outfit now. But anyway, yes, and that part of the farm was very flat, so it really didn't need to be recontoured. There was also a question up above, Johan, that you kind of skipped, I think, which I would like to answer as well, unless anyone else has anything about the remains of the house.
Go ahead, Sybil.
But the other question above that was, did you find some good outhouse pits or trash pits on the property that can yield useful historic artifacts? Actually, the outhouse that was there was just across the creek. I guess that was built by my grandfather, although maybe that's where one was before. I would guess the original farmhouse, the outhouse, was probably much closer. I mean, it's only, I don't know, 100 and less than 200 feet from the house to where that outhouse was. And so that's a thing that we have some interest in, but obviously Legacy would have to be involved if anyone wanted to do that. But we did have a guy with a really sophisticated metal detector came out twice at least. And the best thing he found was a crotal bell, which is like a sleigh bell that dated back to the 1870s or before, I think. So that was exciting. There were a few other things that were found. So yeah, there's always an opportunity for those kinds of underground things to be found.
I'll jump in on that one as well. Yeah, coming from a background in contract archaeology, I would absolutely contest to the fact that there are opportunities for, subsurface deposits, privies, middens, and artifacts were coming out of the cut banks, the low cut banks, and there were artifact scatters and distributions across the site that I noticed. I became really good over the years of finding a needle in a haystack, and I saw artifact scatters everywhere. So yes.
Hey, cool. Next question for Krista. Does the Legacy Land Conservancy hold easements and monitor them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we hold 106 conservation easements and we do monitor them annually. That's part of our upholding the forever end of these agreements. So we go out, we chat with the landowners, we walk the land, we make sure that the conservation values are still being protected, that the terms of the easement are being upheld. Now on our preserves, we don't place conservation easements because legally you can't place a conservation easement on a property that you own, right? Because you can't monitor yourself. There's no check and balance. So we don't, most of our preserves don't have a conservation easement on them, though we do have one or two where that was part of the donor agreement.
Thank you. Next question. So in addition to the endowments for the individual preserves, does the Conservancy have an operational endowment to pay the staff and keep the lights on?
That's also a really great question. So we don't have an operational endowment at this time. We do fundraise annually for our operations. We operate on about a $1.1 million budget annually at this current time. So we have I would say about 47% of our operational funds come from individual donors. And then we have a little under 30% from grants, and then the rest is a mix of fee for service and some interest making accounts. That's small, but every penny counts. So I did mention that we monitor our conservation easements. We also monitor the conservation easements that are held by both the City of Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County. So they pay us for our expertise to annually monitor their projects as well. So in total, we monitor something around 170, 175 easements every year.
Oh, wow. And they're all done by staff?
By a mix of staff and volunteers. So the contracted work is always staff. We definitely don't get paid to send volunteers out. But we do have a subsect of our conservation easements that we do have a really dedicated team of photo monitor volunteers who come out and do that. And we are always welcoming volunteers for that as well. So if you're interested in walking some really beautiful properties and just taking pictures and filling out a form, it's a really lovely way to see the beauty of Southeast Michigan.
Hey, cool. Thank you. Okay, I think we have one last question about volunteering. So can volunteers help work on the trails without too much exposure to poison ivy?
Yes and no. So Kyler Moran is our preserve stewardship manager. And when we do work days, he does try to limit volunteer exposure to things like poison ivy. So we're not going to purposefully send you into a poison ivy patch. That being said, we do always advise folks wear closed-toe shoes, long pants, long sleeve shirts to lower your exposure. And we always bring like ivy rash or Technu, something emergency to, oh my gosh, I accidentally grabbed a chunk of poison ivy with my bare hand, try to mitigate it as much as possible. But it is the outdoors, so there's always a risk of getting a little dirty, getting a little poison ivy, maybe a mosquito bite, maybe a tick. So we do, try to make sure our volunteers have as much support as possible to avoid those more nasty parts of volunteering.
Okay, I think we have answered all the questions, and if anybody have any questions after this, please feel free to reach out to our speakers. Another big thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Sybil and Marian and Krista, for your time putting this together, and this is great presentation. And a reminder to everyone, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available probably in the next few days. You will receive an email when it is available, and please click the survey link to participate in the survey to help us improve our webinars. Before I let everybody go, I would like to quickly announce our next webinar. It is scheduled for November 14th at 1 p.m. and it is about the introduction to the Certified Local Government Program, and the registration is open. Please go to our website, www.mhpn.org/workshops, and hope to see you all next time. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.